All right. Welcome to Campus Pressbox. This is episode number 31 of our podcast series. I'm Ben Belden, Notre Dame sports writer for Campus Pressbox. And today I am joined by my good friend Danny Cunningham, who also writes Notre Dame at the same site as well. Although Danny is no stranger to the podcast trail, this is his Campus Pressbox debut. And we're both excited to be here and looking forward to doing more in the future. Danny, how's it going today?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you doing today, Ben?
I am doing just fine. It was one of those days where, kind of needed that extra cup of coffee and a couple Advil, but, here I am, made it through. So,
I was the same way today. I had a couple commitments that I failed to make, unfortunately, throughout the day. I kind of took today as a personal day. So
there you go. Nothing wrong with that. Anyways, so let's jump right in. So obvious today, we are talking Notre Dame and getting right to it. So last week, whenever I was on here with Damian Bowman, we talked about whether or not Brian Kelly was perhaps, I guess, holding back Notre Dame. We've kind of had those not bad, but not real great seasons other than our national championship run in 2012. And I kind of thought that maybe Brian Kelly is reaching his ceiling at Notre Dame. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know if I would say Brian Kelly's holding back Notre Dame. I know at times things haven't gone as smooth as possible. And yeah, the national championship season was obviously great. It was fun to be a fan of until that last game against Alabama. But at the same time, I'm not ready to get rid of Brian Kelly or push him out the door. I think that he has done great things for this program. And when Charlie Weiss was gone, it really couldn't get much worse. And I think Brian Kelly has done a great job of lifting this program back to almost where it's supposed to be year in and year out. And I really think we're right on the edge of being back to being Notre Dame.
Right. And you and I have talked about this a couple of times that this Notre Dame team, we used to have guys like Brady Quinn and Jeff Samardzija who were great, but not the type of athletes and the type of just, I don't know, like the freak shows that, Reggie Bush was for USC. Now you look at Notre Dame and we've got athletes everywhere. And finally we are playing on the same field athletic wise as teams like USC, where maybe the scheme doesn't have to be perfect to beat a team like USC with all that team speed, and teams like Clemson, or even a team from the SEC. If we should ever, I guess we did meet LSU in Nashville in the bowl game last year. So obviously Brian Kelly's had that effect on Notre Dame, and it's been a welcome sight for I think you and me and Notre Dame fans alike.
Yeah, and if I could make a quick comparison, remember when Ohio State lost in the national championship back-to-back years, I believe in 07 and 08 or 06 and 07, they were kind of the same way Notre Dame was the past couple of years. They were good and they had athletes, but they weren't nearly as deep as those SEC teams that they lost to in Florida and LSU. And now Notre Dame is getting to that point where they have athletes everywhere and they have athletes behind their athletes. And that's evident in a couple of spots such as quarterback and running back this year for Notre Dame.
Right. And, as you and I talked about before we went on air, that who would have thought that we'd be sitting here, third string quarterback, third string running back, and still be talking about what we're going to talk about later, which is Notre Dame's chances at even making a college football playoff, which not to tip our hand too much, but we think is pretty good at this point.
Yeah, I definitely would not have thought that, especially during the Texas game when Terry and Folston went down. I was a little concerned then, but after seeing how well Malik Zaire played in that game, I was like, okay, they can do this. And then I watched 3/4 of the Virginia game, and I go, well, there's the season.
I remember texting you during that game and being like, well, guess this is on the arm of Deshaun Kaiser and or maybe even the leg of Justin Yoon, who I believe he'd missed at least one field goal in that game, maybe two. And you said, I don't know exactly what you said, but two guys I don't have any confidence in at this point. And obviously we saw Kaiser pull that one out by throwing a bomb to Fuller and survive in advance, I guess you can say.
Yeah, and I think that was actually the first article or column I ever wrote for Campus Pressbox was after that game. And I think I texted you, or I know I at least tweeted, I go, I have never been so happy to have to rewrite an entire column because of how that game turned out.
Right. Yeah, that was a text to me. And I feel you there. But I guess kind of hurtling along with what we're trying to get to today. So if you could put a number on it, how long do you think Brian Kelly's at Notre Dame? How many more years?
I would have to think he's here 2 or 3 more years. I would love to see him stay longer because I do think that he has his program almost where it needs to be. And I think getting it where it needs to be is next year at the earliest, or at the very latest the year after that. And I have complete confidence in the guy that he is going to get the program there. But that being said, if other opportunities arise, I can't blame the guy if he wants to go accomplish other personal goals. I would love to see him at least win a national title before he does that. But at the same time, you can't blame a guy if he has other goals on his list that he wants to accomplish, such as coaching in the NFL. Now, if he would run and go to USC, I'd be pretty upset there.
Right. Yeah, it would be hard to walk away. I mean, basically at this point, to go anywhere in college is a lateral move at best, right? So
I would have to think, if not down.
Yeah, exactly. So it would be hard to walk away unless like a perfect NFL job, I don't know, opened up. And I don't think that time is now, especially with, I mean, you're going to have a kind of a quarterback controversy a little bit whenever Malik Zaire gets healthy next year. And I mean, that's a great problem to have. And running back controversy if Prosise stays around and Folston's healthy. And like we said earlier, before we were on the air, Will Fuller hopefully will be back. And so you're going to have playmakers all over the place. And that's what Brian Kelly loves most, is those playmakers. So it's going to be hard for him to walk away, I think, at this point, unless just something wonderful opens up that I don't see it yet. But that brings me to my next point then. So just, I believe yesterday it was, Ian Rappaport, NFL reporter, tweeted, and this is a direct quote: "If the Giants have an opening after this year, Notre Dame's Brian Kelly is a name that GMs pair with that job based on his traits." Now, I read that tweet, and I'm thinking about what the Giants' lineup looks like. They're locked in with Eli Manning for the foreseeable future. He just signed an extension, correct?
I do believe so. Yeah, he just got paid this past offseason.
Right. He just recently got paid. So, based on his traits. Now, Notre Dame's offense looks nothing like the Giants' offense, or the offense that you could run with the Giants' personnel. So I'm wondering, what traits does Brian Kelly have that make him a candidate for the New York Giants job specifically? And I really can't think of a good answer. Anything that you can provide?
The only thing I could think of is his fiery personality, which, to his credit, he has toned down in the past couple of years. If you remember that USF game with the lightning delay, I think there's still that picture that circulates around the internet where his face is just about as red as I don't even know, like as red as a fire hydrant. And that Brian Kelly doesn't seem to exist anymore. With that being gone, I don't know what would really fit in New York with the Giants.
Yeah, it was kind of funny, and I had to chuckle at this. Like the second reply on that tweet was, are the, I guess, the traits you're talking about like red-faced and Irish? I mean, I mean, are those the only things that you can come up with? So I don't know. I don't think the Giants are, especially, being the Giants, you don't think of the Giants as like a Brian Kelly team with a lot of athletes and a lot of just freak wide receivers and, like kind of that running back wide receiver hybrid type of guys that it seems like Brian Kelly loves so much. I don't really see that happening. And outside of the Giants, who might just move on from Coughlin just because Coughlin's old. I mean, yeah. You're looking at probably the Dolphins are going to have one.
Not if this interim coach keeps that team winning. I think that just is. I would have to think the Browns are going to open up because they're fighting 100 years war. But
exactly. Well,
that job's not attractive to anyone, let alone Brian Kelly.
Well, yeah, that's why first of all, that's why I hesitated when I said the Dolphins, because I don't know that the Dolphins actually is going to officially open up to the open market or not. The Browns, I don't even know. I mean, this is we're obviously both Cleveland fans, so we're talking about this, but I don't even know that the Browns job is going to open up, because at what point can you continue to pay people that aren't there? I think Pettin might get a third year to redeem himself, but regardless, I don't think Brian Kelly goes to Cleveland, except maybe if he gets to pick his quarterback in the draft, then maybe he might think of something like that to do. But I just don't see a good NFL job for Brian Kelly at the present time. I think he sticks around, like you said, for another couple years, at least makes a run at the national title with this group of guys that he's got, which is really, I don't know, at this point, they're all Brian Kelly recruited players.
Yeah.
So he's handpicked this team, and I think he's gonna at least roll with them for a couple more years before he makes that jump, if he makes that jump.
And to further your point about the Browns paying people to not coach for them, Notre Dame only has to do that for about another 14 months.
Yeah, it's about time we get guys like Weiss off the docket, I think.
Yeah, he is being paid through December of 2016.
And Charlie Weiss, I'm pretty sure Kansas is still paying him too, large sums of money. So he is, I don't even know is he a coordinator these days? Do we even know?
I believe he's currently out of coaching, and I would assume he's not in a hurry to get back in anytime soon with the paychecks he's collecting.
If I could sit at home every day and collect however many $1 million a year from multiple franchises, and not franchises, but college programs. And yeah, I think I'd just take my sweet time getting back if I even want to at this point. But
absolutely agree.
Anyways, so we've decided that Brian Kelly probably not leaving for a while, but just to backtrack a little bit, should Brian Kelly leave and shock both of us, or even if he chooses to leave in the next 2-3 years, who do you see as a potential replacement? If you have a name, then you can shoot out a name. I know we've discussed my thoughts on it, and if you want to go that route, you can definitely go that route, but just want to give you an opportunity to answer that before we talk about my thoughts.
I don't know if I have a specific name that I would love to see come in and replace Brian Kelly. I'm not the type of person that tries to do that, especially beforehand, before anything happens, especially when the coach is doing well. If Brian Kelly were racking up 3-9 records every year, then yeah, I'd be looking for replacements actively and looking for who I would want to come in and take over the job. But he's not, so that really hasn't entered my mind too much as to who I would want to come in and lead the Golden Dome, or should he leave.
We briefly discussed Tom Herman before he went on the air. Tell me your thoughts on Tom Herman and his situation at Houston, because obviously he's going to be a highly sought after coach after what he's done as the offensive coordinator at Ohio State and the success he had there, and the success he's having at Houston here this season.
Yeah, obviously he was the sexy coordinator, the sexiest coordinator of last offseason. He went to Houston after they fired their coach, and I think he's obviously doing a great job at Houston as well. I do think he's going to be a very, very good head coach one day. My only issue with that is I don't think he is ready to make the jump from Houston to Notre Dame. I think that's a little bit big of a jump for him, especially after only 1 year at Houston per se, if this would happen this offseason, as I am assuming we're talking. That being said, what I see in the future for him, I think Charlie Strong continues to struggle at Texas, and he just takes a drive from Houston to Austin and takes over that program following Charlie Strong's departure next year.
That definitely would be a really interesting fit, because then you'd have those high-powered offenses of TCU, Baylor, and then if you throw in a Tom Herman offense at Texas, that could get fun in the Big 12 real quick, I think.
Yeah, the Big 12 would actually just start playing 7-on-7 instead of 11-on-11 football. So
I love it. Forget if you're over 200 and we'll say 230 pounds, you're not even getting recruited there.
No, unless you're just a freak linebacker.
All right. So talking about Tom Herman a little bit on the same coaching tree. And we talked about this just a little bit. And Davey and I talked about this last week whenever we did our Notre Dame podcast. But Urban Meyer. So Urban Meyer was, as you and I discussed, born in Toledo, moved to Ashtabula, got his coaching start in the college ranks at Bowling Green. He is a Roman Catholic, and as Damien put it, it's the thought is that Urban Meyer is going to be at Ohio State at least until his kids are done with the level of school that they're in. And his youngest son is, who this basically applies to, is by my research, a sophomore at Bishop Watterson High School in Columbus, where he plays football.
I love that you're creeping on Urban Meyer's kids.
Just easy little Google search. Easy little Google search. But anyways, so sophomore in high school, that gives him obviously the rest of this year and 2 more to graduate. And considering that Urban Meyer has indicated potential interest in Notre Dame's job in the past, albeit it's kind of a distant past at this point, just kind of seems that Urban might take his son, who's already at a Catholic school, and in 2 or 3 years, when Brian Kelly decides, I'm done with Notre Dame, maybe we're talking about Urban Meyer taking his kid to South Bend, gets to further that Catholic education, and take over the Notre Dame job. What are your thoughts on Urban Meyer and that likelihood at Notre Dame?
Funny you bring this up. I actually was reading an article on Back to the Future Day, which was last week or whatever. And there was an article that predicted the next 10 or 15 college football playoff national champions. And in 2019, it moved to 8 teams. So they went through that stuff and it was great. But in 2018, they had Notre Dame winning the title with Urban Meyer at the helm. Wow. So it is entirely possible. I'm not sure that I'm going to go to Vegas and bet that it happens, but I wouldn't be the least bit shocked. Urban has said in the past that Notre Dame is his dream job, and he did coach at Notre Dame back in the day. That's where he got one of his first college jobs. He coached wide receiver at Notre Dame.
Right.
I don't know if it's going to happen, but I wouldn't be shocked if it did. This is his dream job, and in all honesty, the only thing I could see him ever leaving Ohio State for.
Right. I mean, when you're coaching at Ohio State, and Damien and I talked about this last week, but when you're coaching at Ohio State, there's only so many places that you could go that could even be considered a lateral or maybe a step up, just depending on, what your coaching preference is. Notre Dame is one of those programs that would not be a significant step back at the very least. And as I pointed out last week, when you win a national championship at a place, it seems as if people think that the pressure goes down because you've already got one. I kind of think it's the opposite. Once you get one, people start getting greedy. And I mean, let's be honest here. Ohio State was obviously really good at the end of last season. And as far as expectations so far this season, they've basically regressed. Now, whether or not they turn it around and win a national title, that's another story. Hope that doesn't happen, obviously, as a Notre Dame fan. But at this point, Ohio State doesn't look as good as they did last year. And if that trend continues, if there's, an 11-2 season in there and they don't make the college football playoff, I could definitely see Urban Meyer making that jump, especially since the timeline kind of, hypothetically lines up.
Yeah, and to go back to what you said about there only being so many programs that are a lateral step or not a step back or maybe a slight step up, in my opinion, there are 7 historically great college football programs. You've got Ohio State, Michigan, USC, Notre Dame, Alabama, Oklahoma, and Texas. He's at one of those schools. He could only go to one of the other 6, in my opinion. There's no going anywhere else.
Right. And I don't know. with what Jim Harbaugh is doing at Michigan right now, you could be talking about Jim Harbaugh you could be talking about Michigan, I guess, as the, next powerhouse in the Big Ten. And I think that would make, if and when that happens, I think that makes it the perfect time for Urban Meyer to just, scurry on out of the Big Ten. By that point, Notre Dame might actually be playing Michigan again, but kind of takes the pressure off. If you're Notre Dame and you're losing to Michigan, obviously that's bad. But if you're Ohio State and you're losing to Michigan, that's obviously worse.
Yeah. And the Back to the Future article had Michigan win it all in 2017, by the way.
Goodness gracious. All right. Well, yeah, that's some hefty stuff there. So I think we've talked about enough hypotheticals now. Well, I guess we're getting into more hypotheticals.
Let's talk more.
At least this has, I guess, some backing to it at the very least. So we're moving on to our segment of the show where we're going to talk about Notre Dame's college football playoff prospects. So I've got the list of the top 25 sitting in front of me. I'll list off just starting at 1 down to about 14 or so. So we've got Ohio State at the top, followed by Baylor, Clemson at 3, LSU, TCU, Michigan State at 6. That kind of ends the unbeatens in the top 10. So then you're followed by Alabama, Stanford, Notre Dame, and then rounding out the top 10 is Iowa at 7-0. And then outside of the top 10, you've got Florida, Oklahoma State, who is 7-0 and is going to have plenty of an opportunity to prove themselves. Utah, who just lost to USC, and Oklahoma, who also is going to have a chance to prove themselves. Outside of that, you're looking at teams like Memphis is 7-0. I don't know if even if they run the table that they're good enough to get into the college football playoff. Florida State, who I have never thought was really that good, and finally got knocked off by Georgia Tech. Shout out to Georgia Tech for helping Notre Dame's strength of schedule, by the way.
Absolutely. Notre Dame's strength of schedule had a very good weekend.
Oh, yeah, it did. But then just to round it out, then you're looking at Houston, 7-0 at 18, Toledo at 20, 7-0, Temple at 7-0, who Notre Dame hopefully will knock off on Saturday. And I think that just about does it for anybody with a prayer of a chance at getting into the college football playoff. So I think the best way maybe to look at this is to go conference by conference. But before we do that, let's look at Notre Dame's key remaining games. So they've got a game at Temple on Saturday. And as I just mentioned, Temple's sitting at 21. On November 7th, they've got a game at Pitt, who is sitting now at 23. And on November 28th, the Saturday after Thanksgiving, they will travel to what hopes to be, for Notre Dame fans, a big-time showdown between Notre Dame and Stanford out in Palo Alto. I don't think there's a team that plays 3 ranked schools. There might be maybe when you start talking Baylor, TCU, and Oklahoma State or something like that.
Yeah.
But not too many teams play that type of a schedule on their way out. And Notre Dame's sitting at 9th at this point. So we're thinking that if we win out, we get in. Is that what we're going to start with?
I think if Notre Dame finishes at 11-1, they're very hard to keep out of in the top 4, especially with what we thought they got through their tough stretch of their schedule. Turns out they have 3 more games against ranked teams. That would put them against a ranked Georgia Tech at the time, a ranked Clemson at the time, a ranked Temple, a ranked Pitt, and a ranked Stanford. That's against 5 ranked teams. And if you go 4-1 with your one loss being by 2 points in a hurricane on the road at what is allegedly the toughest place to play in college football, I think the committee is going to be pretty kind to you.
Right. And so if Notre Dame runs the table, okay, and also just for the sake of not overlooking opponents, but Notre Dame also has senior day at home against Wake Forest, and their Shamrocks. There you go. Have fun. And their Shamrock Series game at Fenway Park in Boston against Boston College, which we talked, and Boston College's offense, as you put it earlier, just can't get out of their own way. So we'll kind of brush those games aside real quick. But so if Notre Dame runs the table, that means they're going to go 11-1, beat, by my count, 4 ranked opponents at the time of their meeting, which would be Georgia Tech, Temple, Pitt, and Stanford. Also with a rout of Texas and an impressive win against a USC team that's looked a lot better. Georgia Tech obviously helped that by beating Florida State. And UMass had Toledo on the ropes this weekend for about 2.5, 3 quarters. And I mean, UMass is not very good, but at the very least has a little bit of football talent. So looking at that, obviously to start the equation, Notre Dame has to beat Stanford to make any of this relevant, which would be Stanford's second loss. So there's one opponent that's ahead of Notre Dame that's in contention for the college football playoff that Notre Dame can keep out on their own. They can take care of by themselves. Baylor and TCU play each other on, I guess this is Friday, the 27th of November. Baylor just lost their quarterback for the season. So we're probably going to assume that TCU wins that game, but you never know. It seems like whatever quarterback they plug in at Baylor seems to do well. So I guess you never know. But one of those teams is going to get their first loss, and both of those teams have to play Oklahoma and Oklahoma State also. So I think at best you get one team that is undefeated out of the Big 12. You would think if a team runs the Big 12 that they make it to the college football playoff. Do you think that's safe to say?
Yeah, it would be unjust to keep out an undefeated team unless there are 5 of them, and I cannot see that happening.
Right. So any of those Big 12 teams, if the winner of the Big 12 ends up being someone that's 11-1, which I guess could happen, do you think a 1-loss champion of the Big 12, whoever it ends up being, so it could be Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, TCU, or Baylor at this point, do you think any of those teams have the same type of resume that Notre Dame has?
No, and the one worry I would have would be Oklahoma, but when you point to them, their 1 loss is to Texas, who Notre Dame beat by 35. That I was listening to the radio this past weekend, and one of the hosts wanted to play a game with the 2 analysts he had on. He goes, all right, I want to name 2 teams, and you guys tell me who's better. First one off the rip, he goes, Oklahoma or Notre Dame? Both analysts say Notre Dame. And then he goes, see, I think it's Oklahoma. One of the analysts goes and says, you realize they lost to Texas, and Notre Dame beat Texas by 35, right? And the host goes, yeah, I guess you're right there. So I would have to think that loss to Texas easily puts Notre Dame ahead because they're one common opponent. Notre Dame won by 35 and Oklahoma lost by 10, I think.
Right. And Notre Dame has a lot of those similar types of situations going for them. So I wasn't going to mention this till later, but now that I'm thinking about it, Notre Dame has the opportunity. So Pitt is undefeated in the ACC at this point, and in control of whichever division they are in the ACC. And they're likely going to face Clemson or Florida State in the ACC title game, whoever wins that Florida State Clemson game. Notre Dame has the opportunity to put on their resume that they beat the ACC winner, should Pitt win that game, or that they lost by 2 to the ACC winner. And they also have the opportunity to put on their resume that they beat the Pac-12 winner, because at this point, Stanford looks like the best, far and away the best team in the Pac-12. Because Stanford handled USC, and USC just absolutely throttled Utah, who everyone thought was really, really good this weekend. So if those things are going Notre Dame's way, or at least if they say that they played with someone who played that was one of the 2 best teams in the Pac-12 or the ACC, it's going to be hard for a Pac-12 or ACC team to beat Notre Dame out, especially if they're not undefeated.
I agree with you 100%. And going back to that Clemson game, Clemson beat Notre Dame by 2, obviously, and Notre Dame lost, and give Clemson credit for winning, but the game was played at Clemson in a hurricane. I don't know if that's enough for Notre Dame to get knocked out. I think if it comes down to it and that's their loss, that's the best loss anyone has in the country. And I hate to say, oh, it's the best loss, but it is. There's no one else that has a loss that's quite like that.
I'm completely on board with you there. So we'll probably talk about the Pac-12 here in a second. They're on the docket for a little bit later, but let's start by conference, sorting through some of these teams that have a chance to contend with Notre Dame for the college football playoff. We're going to start with, the beasts of the Southeastern Conference, and obviously the three teams that are really remaining in the race, especially after A&M lost this weekend to Ole Miss. The three teams that have, LSU is undefeated, and Bama and Florida both have one loss. So Florida's probably going to win the SEC East, and probably the winner of the LSU-Bama game wins the SEC West. So I think best case scenario for Notre Dame, is it safe to say that the SEC championship winner is going to get in regardless of who they are?
I would have to think so. I think it's incredibly tough to keep the SEC out, although I do think the SEC is overrated as a conference. I know the College Football Committee doesn't exactly view it the same way I do. I think Leonard Fournette might be the best player in the country, and if his team has one loss, it's going to be hard to keep him out. And I'm also worried about Bama because they are the dynasty of today's world, and if they have one loss, it's going to be hard to keep them out as well. I think every Notre Dame fan should have a second favorite team or a third favorite team. If I understand if your second favorite team is whoever Ohio State's playing, but your third favorite team this year should be whoever Alabama is playing, because if they get a second loss, the door is absolutely 100% wide open for Notre Dame to get in.
Right. So on that same day that Notre Dame travels to Pitt, which is not this Saturday, but a week from Saturday, that's going to be the big showdown between LSU and Bama, which is at Bama, I believe.
Correct.
It is. And I think if you're a Notre Dame fan, you're rooting hard for LSU to win out. Is that safe to say?
I would think so. I mean, if they're undefeated, they're getting in. And obviously, if you're a Notre Dame fan, you don't want anyone else to be undefeated because that puts you in great position to get in. But if I want to see Alabama get that second loss, because right now I think if they are a one-loss team, they're in. I think it's hard to keep them out with what they've done, not just this year, but for the entire Nick Saban era. And I hate to say that it matters because it shouldn't, but it does.
Right. And if LSU wins out, that would mean, giving Bama that second loss, which would in effect eliminate them. I mean, it would be really hard pressed in this climate to get even a Bama team with two losses in there. And if they win out, obviously LSU is going to have to play in the SEC title game, likely against Florida, and that would give Florida's second lost. Or if it's not Florida, then that means Florida has lost prior to that. So I think clear cut what Notre Dame's rooting for in the SEC right now is for LSU to just keep feeding Leonard Fournette, who absolutely looked amazing against Notre Dame in the bowl game that I was at last New Year's season, by the way. But keep feeding Fournette, pray for good health for him, and because I don't know that LSU has a whole ton outside of Fournette, offensively at least. And I think that LSU is the one team that that's in front of us that we are actually rooting for, because they can just eliminate so many threats on their way to the SEC title. So if two SEC teams get in, so should Bama beat LSU, and Bama and LSU are sitting with one loss at the end of the season. Well, is a one-loss Notre Dame team the same, equal, or less than a one-loss LSU team, let's say?
I think a one-loss Notre Dame team would be ahead of a one-loss LSU team. I think Notre Dame is a better team than LSU. I truly do. I would have 100% confidence in the Fighting Irish to go out and beat LSU on a neutral field, but I'm not so sure about Bama. But if LSU has one loss, I think Notre Dame's ahead of them. If Bama has one loss, I don't think Notre Dame's ahead of them. If LSU goes undefeated and Notre Dame would play them in the playoff, I would have no doubts that Notre Dame wouldn't be able to win that game.
I echo what you're saying 100%. So I think regardless of what goes on, I think as far as the SEC goes, I think there's going to be one team in with Notre Dame that takes one spot. And I think we've kind of conceded that fact, but I think we're looking at probably a maximum of one SEC team. I just, if two SEC teams get in, I don't know what's going on in that college football playoff room, especially if, things play out like we think they're going to play out. I mean, we're talking about a Big 12 team, an SEC team, maybe Notre Dame or Stanford, depending on who wins. It's going to be hard to fit two SEC teams in there because we haven't even talked about the Big 10 yet.
I agree. And I think if you're trying to get two SEC teams in there, multiple teams are getting screwed over. And I don't think that's going to happen.
Right. All right. So let's power right on to the ACC. And we kind of talked about this a little bit already, but kind of three key players to keep an eye on in the ACC as far as Notre Dame fans are concerned are Clemson, Florida State, and Pitt, who Notre Dame has the opportunity to play in a little under 2 weeks. Pretty clear what Notre Dame fans should be rooting for here, and that's for Pitt to continue to play well, march right onto the ACC title game, and win the ACC. Pitt's running game, I think, has an opportunity to keep them in just about any football game. Have you seen Pitt play at all this year?
I have not had the opportunity to see them play. I caught a little bit of the game against Syracuse, but not much. I saw the beginning, but I didn't get to see the end of that game. And other than that, I really haven't noticed them. So take that for what it's worth.
Right. Pitt is one of those teams that seems like they're in every game they play, whether that's playing against a top-notch opponent and keeping it close because they can control the ball so well with their running game, or messing around with a Syracuse team that, I mean, to be fair, Syracuse has played some good opponents this year and played them tough. Like they played LSU up there at the Carrier Dome, very tough for about three and a quarter quarters before LSU kind of took hold of that game. So I haven't watched a ton of Pitt, but I know enough about them to be confident in their abilities to, at least keep an ACC title game close. And their opponent is either going to be Clemson or Florida State. The Clemson-Florida State game, I think, is going to say a lot about Notre Dame's chances. On one hand, as a Notre Dame fan, you almost hope that Clemson wins because that makes their loss look a little less bad. But at the same time, the more one-loss teams, I think if Notre Dame's a one-loss team at the end of the season, including Clemson, even though they lost to Clemson, I think that Notre Dame might be the most impressive one-loss team. What are your thoughts on that?
It would depend on how that game against Florida State goes. I mean, if Clemson comes out and just, can't handle Florida State and gets blown out, then Notre Dame's loss against Clemson looks better than Clemson's loss against Florida State. But if it's a close game and Clemson barely lost to Florida State and Notre Dame barely lost to Clemson, I think Clemson would get that edge. And by that fact, I think Florida State might get the edge there because they would be a one-loss team as well. And they beat Clemson, who beat Notre Dame. So I think, as much as it pains me to say it, you almost want to see Clemson go undefeated and take a spot in the playoff. If that happens, and there's still 3 more spots up for grabs, you have to hope Notre Dame is one of those other 3 teams. If Notre Dame loses by 2 to a team that maybe gets that 1 or 2 seed, their chances of getting the 3 or 4 could be pretty good.
Right. And, obviously, like I say, dream scenarios that Pitt, I think we're in agreement that if Pitt beats Clemson, then Notre Dame's kind of in the driver's seat there, because how can you put Clemson in to the college football playoff having lost to Pitt and Notre Dame having beat Pitt? Even though Clemson won, Notre Dame's body of work outside of that game that was, in Death Valley in a hurricane, Notre Dame, outside of that game, Notre Dame's body of work the rest of the season, I think, is much more impressive than Clemson. So if Pitt can somehow find a way to win the ACC, that would be really nice.
That would be incredible for Notre Dame.
Absolutely wonderful. But worst case scenario, well, I don't know, maybe even best case. This one's a hard one. So we've decided that an undefeated team out of the Big 12 is going to be in. Not probably, is going to be in.
If it happens.
If it happens. The winner of the SEC is going to be in. That would put, if Clemson goes undefeated, they're definitely in. And maybe even if they get one loss. So we're sitting here looking at the Pac-12 and the Big 10. And talking about the Pac-12, I think the Notre Dame's got their thumb on the Pac-12 at this point, especially with what happened in the Coliseum in Los Angeles this weekend. So obviously, whenever I first was preparing for this podcast, I was actually watching this Utah USC game, and I'll tell you what, it was great to watch USC just absolutely rout Utah from about the second quarter on. And I can't say enough, like, fight on Trojans. Thank you so much for winning that game.
Things Notre Dame fans never say.
Exactly. First and last time, probably. I've got a buddy who's actually from LA that I'm going to have to make listen to this podcast because he is probably going to have to clean his ears out after hearing me say that. And he won't believe it.
Too.
Well, yeah, but he won't believe that I said it unless he actually hears it. So, but anyways, moving on from that, like we said, Stanford's going to get eliminated from the college football playoff if they lose to Notre Dame. That's the plain and simple. And no team in the Pac-12 has an undefeated overall record at this point. So hoping that Stanford then goes on and wins the Pac-12, which I think they're the best team in the Pac-12. Obviously, the best team doesn't win every game, but I would say at this point, Stanford is the favorite to win it. That would be, once again, great for Notre Dame to potentially say that they beat the ACC winner and they beat the Pac-12 winner. Now, on the flip side of that coin, if Stanford loses to Notre Dame, which doesn't affect their Pac-12 standing, obviously, Utah's still in the driver's seat in the Pac-12 South. And that would probably set up a Utah. I mean, regardless, you're probably looking at a Utah-Stanford Pac-12 title game. And if Utah finds a way to beat Stanford, this is where perhaps disaster might strike for Notre Dame. Thoughts on Utah and Stanford?
I don't think Utah is going to get in. I think this loss to USC eliminated them. They got thoroughly beaten down by a team that doesn't have a coach, coming off a 10-point loss to their rival, and just really has not lived up to nearly what their potential is all year. I think Utah's done. Now, Stanford's a different story. I think if Stanford runs the table and beats Notre Dame, they're in the playoff. I do think that the Stanford-Notre Dame game at the end of the season on November 28th is going to determine a team that heads to the college football playoff. I truly believe that. And I think Stanford is going to go on and win the Pac-12, which is great and all. And as long as Notre Dame beats them, I want them to win every game they play the rest of the year.
I agree with you. And thinking about it, it would be hard for Utah to get in having lost to USC, especially the week right after Notre Dame had just beaten USC. Especially when USC had 10 days or whatever you said to prepare for Notre Dame, because they played Washington. It was on the Thursday before Notre Dame week.
Yeah. And going on that point, actually 4 out of Notre Dame's 5 opponents in a stretch between Clemson and Pitt have 10 days to prepare for Notre Dame. Clemson played Louisville on a Thursday before they played Notre Dame. Then Navy played a Saturday. USC played Thursday against Washington. Temple played this past Thursday, and Pitt plays this coming Thursday. So all Notre Dame, 4 out of 5 Notre Dame opponents have had more than 7 days to prepare for the Irish, which is a very weird thing. And I'm not sure I've ever seen this happen in quite a stretch as it has against Notre Dame this year. But as long as Notre Dame gets through it with only that minor hiccup against Clemson, I think it'd be pretty impressive and maybe something the committee would look at. I'm not sure if it would really be a huge detail, but hey, you never know.
You need to tweet that at ESPN or something like that. Get some of those like high paid stats researchers to look that up, because that's unreal.
I'll tweet that at Condoleezza Rice. I know she'll have Notre Dame's back on that college football committee.
Oh, good old Condoleezza. All right. Oh boy. So, yeah. So I guess the conclusion we're coming to at this point is that if Notre Dame takes care of business at Stanford, no way a Pac-12 team gets in over them. So we're still sitting in good shape. At the most, at this point, we have 3 teams in. And hopefully Notre Dame can be that 4th, but we haven't talked about the Big Ten. Obviously, there can be less than 3 teams at this point, depending on how, things in the Big 12 and especially the ACC shake out. But talking about the Big Ten, and Damien and I kind of talked about this, not at length, but we talked about this last week. So there are 3 undefeated teams in the Big Ten, which if you would have told me that at the beginning of the year, I probably would have said you were nuts. But then again, I don't know. Ohio State and Michigan State haven't played each other yet, nor does Iowa play Ohio State or Michigan State in their regular season schedule. So I guess in a way it's not all that surprising. But go ahead.
I would have been shocked about Iowa. Obviously, I'm surprised they're undefeated, but Ohio State hasn't played anybody, and Michigan State played Michigan, and that's been their only tough game because Oregon has looked like crap all year. So that what looked like a great win for Sparty really hasn't looked so good since, especially once Utah drubbed them.
Right. Kind of the same boat. Michigan State was in the same boat with Oregon as Notre Dame kind of was in with Georgia Tech. Notre Dame's Georgia Tech game that win looked like a really big thing for Notre Dame at the time, but Georgia Tech until last Saturday has kind of let Notre Dame down since then, beating what I think is not a very good Florida State team, but by the same token, Florida State was ranked in the top 10. So, but I digress from that. And the encouraging thing for Notre Dame at this point is that there's no way that Michigan State, Ohio State, and Iowa, all 3 remain undefeated. In fact, 2 of them have to have a loss because Michigan State and Ohio State are going to play each other. And obviously, one team's going to win, one team's going to lose, and that team's basically going to play for the Big Ten title unless Ohio State drums Michigan State and then loses to Michigan, which I think is going to happen. And honestly, that'll be kind of fun just because there's going to be all these teams with a loss, and the chaos is just going to be fun to watch. But we'll talk about that here in a second. But anyways, regardless of who comes out of that Ohio State, Michigan State, and I guess Michigan scrum, then they'll play what might be Iowa in the Big Ten title game. To be honest, I'm not sure if we're as fun as it would be to see that absolute chaos if Michigan State, and Ohio State all tie for that division. What did you say earlier that they aren't going to find out in time to start preparing?
If that scenario would happen, if Ohio State would beat Michigan State and then Ohio State would lose to Michigan, and this is provided that all 3 teams don't lose any other games outside of what I just mentioned, then it would go all the way to the 5th tiebreaker to determine the champion of that division of the Big Ten. And then the champion of that division would obviously play Iowa or whoever wins the other Big Ten division. The fifth tiebreaker happens to be the poll from the College Football Committee. Now, we're all well aware that poll is not released until Tuesday evening. So therefore, the team would not be able to even begin to prepare until Wednesday because they wouldn't know if they have to play or not. They would be either wasting their time practicing or not able to practice until Wednesday of that week.
Right. I knew you had a hold on that. I kind of got my brain all confused, and it is a confusing situation, but
it is, and I love it.
So thanks for straightening me out on that one. But so should that happen, and you assume that whoever comes out of that scrum is slightly disadvantaged, although talent-wise probably still advantaged against Iowa. Although we don't know because they haven't played each other. Iowa might be at an advantage for that game, and if Iowa goes on, runs the table in the Big Ten, and is undefeated, well, we've talked about maybe 3 teams that are in over Notre Dame already, and if Iowa runs the table in the Big Ten, then again, you're looking at potential disaster for Notre Dame. Now, I think Ohio State, Michigan State, and Michigan are all better than Iowa. If I had to wager on that game, I'd take whoever was playing Iowa. But you never know with all that craziness going on. That could be what we're looking at as potentially disastrous for Notre Dame. How do you think that plays out?
I really don't see Iowa going undefeated, in all honesty. I think that they would not be able to win the Big Ten against either of those 3 teams. And in the same token as those 3 teams not being able to prepare until Wednesday, they still might be at the advantage because all 3 of them realistically could begin to prepare for Iowa, but Iowa can't prepare for anybody because they don't know who they're going to play. Now, 2 of the teams would be wasting their time in the case of Michigan State, Ohio State, and Michigan, but all 3 could be amply prepared for Iowa. Iowa's going to have to prepare for 3 teams.
You raise good points.
I try.
Looking at Iowa's schedule, they play Maryland, who's been awful, Indiana, who's played Ohio State tough and played Michigan State tough for about 2.5, 3 quarters, Minnesota, Purdue, who's been awful, and Nebraska, who's been pretty bad. But then again, I am not sold that Iowa is very good. But then again, how do I know? Because they haven't actually played anyone. I think they beat Wisconsin 10-6. Oh, but Iowa, speaking of Pitt, we're talking about how good Pitt is. Iowa beat Pitt, and I did not realize that.
On a 57-yard last-second field goal.
Yikes. All right. Well, I did not know that fact. But regardless, so let's just hope that Iowa doesn't come out of the Big Ten. And I'm going to go ahead and just steer the conversation in the direction of we're looking at Michigan State or Ohio State with 1 loss. Do you think? I don't see a scenario where the Big Ten gets 2.
I would be shocked if the Big Ten got 2 teams into the playoff. I would be very shocked because I don't think Michigan State is that good. They obviously got extremely lucky against Michigan. I think Ohio State is good and they haven't reached their potential yet this year, but they shouldn't be rewarded for just being good on paper and not reaching their potential. I think if they lose, especially with it coming this late in the season, they could be done as well. I think if someone from the Big Ten is going to get into the college football playoff, they have to go undefeated.
Okay, so that gives us, assuming that worst case scenario is that for Notre Dame fans is that Michigan State or Ohio State is undefeated and is a clear-cut winner. So that gives you the winner of the Big Ten, perhaps the winner of the ACC, the winner of the SEC, and the winner of the Big 12, which would put Notre Dame at 5th. Now, we've talked about how Notre Dame, and then obviously the Pac-12 factors in there, but I think we've pretty well squashed the Pac-12 altogether. probably the one that we're looking at to for Notre Dame to kind of scooch out is probably the winner of the ACC, regardless of what happens. Notre Dame's hovering right around that 4-5 area. And obviously that Stanford game is going to be a big game. Hopefully we get game day out there for that one. And then it's really built up to be like the opening round of the college football playoff, like the play-in game for the college football playoff. I hope that's how it's kind of built up. And hopefully that atmosphere coupled by, Notre Dame's other body of work is enough to get them in over a team, especially from like the ACC. But I think we've reached the conclusion that Notre Dame's in the mix for the 4 or 5. It really seems as if Notre Dame takes care of business. They're going to be looking at the 4. But at this point, you and I do not hold a seat on the playoff committee, or at least the real one. I'm obviously on the playoff committee for Campus Pressbox, but that doesn't hold any water, unfortunately. I'm
still waiting for my invite to the real one. Any day in the mail now, I swear.
Hopefully they listen to this podcast, and maybe we'll get that invite after.
We'll have to have Damien send it to Condoleezza.
There we go. You think he's got to connect over there?
I don't know. I mean, she is a Notre Dame girl, and I think that is worth bringing up. I'm not saying that she's going to be biased towards Notre Dame, but part of me thinks that Barry Alvarez might have been a little biased towards the Big Ten last year in getting Ohio State in.
There you go.
I wouldn't be surprised if Condoleezza is really pushing for the Fighting Irish to get that 4 spot.
Man, I hope so. But anyways, so give me your 4 teams for the college football playoff.
My 4 teams at this moment, or my 4 teams at the end of the year?
At the end of the year. How do you think it's going to play out?
I believe that Notre Dame will slide in there at number 4. I truly think that. Actually, you know what? No, I'm going to say Notre Dame at number 3.
Oh,
I think LSU, a 1-loss LSU, is going to get that 4 spot. I think that they could beat Alabama and then slip up somewhere else, and then still win the SEC and get in at number 4. Clemson's going to get number 2. And it pains me to say it, but I think that Ohio State's going to get number 1. Maybe.
I'm going to switch it up a little bit. I'm going to go undefeated LSU at number 1, playing number 4 Notre Dame. So that's going to be 1 game. And then I'm going to go ahead and say that undefeated Ohio State is going to be at 2 in a rematch of the Orange Bowl. Was it the Orange Bowl game? It might be. I don't know.
It was
the Orange Bowl game against Clemson, number 3. And those are at this point my 4 teams. So many different combinations of things can happen. It's crazy. And this is why we love college football, right?
Absolutely. And in all truthfulness, I would love to revisit this entire podcast in about 3 weeks just to see where we are and what new things have arisen.
For sure. All right. So we've rambled on for a good period of time. We've got a couple more questions that I just want to ask you real quick that we're not going to go into at length, but just a couple things we think might be interesting for the end of a Notre Dame podcast. So talking about all this college football stuff, are 4 teams enough for the college football playoff?
I do not think so. I think that 8 teams need to be in play. I mean, you have 5 power conferences, and no matter what, you're leaving 1 out. Now, this scenario is maybe a little far-fetched, but what if the champions of all 5 Power 5 conferences go unbeaten? College Football Committee is in a very, very tough spot to be in. I think going to 8 teams would be very beneficial for them. I'm not saying that you give an automatic berth to the winner of a Power 5 conference, but I think if you put 8 teams in, it really lightens the burden on that committee.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. Although I think 8's perfect, first of all. Heck, even 6 with teams, ranked 1 and 2 getting a bye would be better. Although I like to keep everything, level playing field. I wouldn't hate if each conference got their conference title winner in. I don't know. That might be a debate for a later date. But I think moving to 8, bottom line is that you can get everyone who definitely deserves to be there in, and you might even be able to work in. So we've got a lot of teams towards the bottom of the top 25 that are undefeated, like a Toledo, a Houston, I don't know who else, Memphis. I think if you moved it to 8, you'd get a lot less of a gripe from some people that, well, we ran what are we supposed to do better than run the table? And I think probably Houston or Memphis, or I think Houston and Memphis might play each other. I don't know. But
yes.
One of those teams probably is going to say, we ran the table. What else are we supposed to do? Well, I mean, I guess what they'll say to him is join a power conference. But I don't know. I think that moving to 8 kind of solves that type of an issue. When a mid-major school like that, and usually you only have like one runs the table, you can at least throw them in there at 8, maybe let them get crushed by whoever's number 1, and you can kind of eliminate that controversy a little bit. So I'm on board with you thinking that 8 would be perfect. Last thing I want to talk about real quickly. Should Notre Dame join a conference?
Absolutely not. Notre Dame joining a conference would be one of the worst decisions that institution could make. Obviously, they generate a ton of cash. I mean, they have more money than God. They truly do. Thanks to the NBC contract and not having to share any money with anyone else anywhere. I don't think Notre Dame football, who does very well without the help of 13 other institutions, needs help from 13 other institutions. I think they're doing just fine by themselves, and I don't think that needs to change.
Notre Dame has a few nice recruiting pitches. One is that they play on national television for every home game and most away games also. So your family, even if you move across country, is going to get to watch you. Number 2 is that everyone loves, Southern California football players. Notre Dame, with having USC and Stanford on their schedule, gets to play a game in the state of California every year. So some of those California recruits that don't want to, leave and come to cold South Bend in the middle of October, can see Notre Dame play, and perhaps, make a decision that way. And they're always playing, they're not locked into a conference that might end up making them play an easy schedule. A lot's made of teams basically in any conference having a cupcake schedule because, there is a little bit of merit to the fact that, for instance, Ohio State can't control how the rest of the Big Ten is, and that they schedule their opponents out of conference, 4 and 5 years ahead of time. I get that. Like I say, Ohio State schedule is probably a topic for another time, but taking those arguments into account, Notre Dame, with the way they schedule, they're going to have at least 2 or 3 pretty marquee games that at least people are going to have an eye on a year because they just can't miss when you're scheduling basically, 5 or 6 at least reputable programs every single year. And even perennial games against like Navy are not even the most cupcake game that you could schedule. I'll take Navy over just about any FCS school that the SEC plays any day of the week.
Navy was in the others receiving votes category of the top 25 when Notre Dame and Navy met. So they're not a cupcake. They're a bowl team year in and year out. They're no easy task, especially the way they run that triple option. It's very hard to prepare for, and they beat quality teams all the time. It's not like they're Florida A&M, as we talked about off air. It's not even like they're a typical American Conference team. They could realistically go and win that conference and sneak into a New Year's Six bowl.
Exactly. So with USC, Stanford, Navy being perennials, one of those teams is probably going to be really good every year. and Navy's always going to be there. And then you've got 9 more opportunities to find 1 or 2 more marquee matchups, and that's honestly more than what most college football teams do in the college football climate. The recent college football climate, I guess you could say. So, agree with you on that. I think that's a good wrap to our show tonight. Couple things. So we mentioned the November 7th date a lot. 3 big games to look for as far as the college football climate on that date, which is a week from this Saturday. So you're going to have a Notre Dame at Pitt game, which is to be determined, but I think probably that's going to be either a 3:30 or 8 o'clock game in a doubleheader with Florida State at Clemson. And probably both of those games are going to be on ABC, like I say, in a doubleheader at 3:30 and 8 o'clock. And then you've got LSU at Bama, likely an 8 o'clock at night CBS game. They'd be doing an injustice if it wasn't, but it's to be determined at this point. So 3 games to look for. That's going to be a great Saturday of college football right there. So that's about all I've got. Danny, tell everyone where they can find you.
You can find me on Twitter at dcunninghamcle. That's where you can find me. I'm also a writer at Burning River Baseball. I write at Campus Pressbox, and I also work at ESPN Cleveland.
And I am Ben Belden, and you can find me on Twitter at bbeldencle. That's BBELDENCLE. I'm a writer for Campus Pressbox. I write for Northeast Ohio Sports Blogs. So I'll be doing some Cavs things over there. And I think that's all I got. So Danny, thanks for joining me tonight. Hopefully we can do this again in the near future.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
We still definitely need to get Damien on to talk with us. I think that would be really fun to get all 3 of us in the same spot. And speaking of Damien, he's the founder of Campus Pressbox, and you can find him on Twitter at Damian Bowman. That's all for me. Once again, Danny, thanks to all of you for listening, and we will see you next time.